Hi, my name is Simon Brown. I work at the British Film Institute, of which the National Film and Television Archive, as it is now, is a part. And you're about to watch a 100-year-old piece of British cinema history. This is the first film version of Alice in Wonderland that was released in May 1903, and at that time, it was the longest British film that had been yet produced. It ran about 800 feet, which at silent speed would have been around about 10 to 12 minutes. And the average film at that time was only a quarter of that, so this was really a super production, if you like. It could actually be purchased in parts as well. You didn't have to buy the whole film. You could buy some of the sequences and just show them individually. The character of the White Rabbit that you're looking at here is being played by Hepworth's wife, who was drafted in as an extra when they needed more actors, and the part of Alice is being played by Mabel Clark, who started working at Hepworth's in 1900 as a sort of general help-out girl, making costumes, making tea, so on and so forth. At that time, Hepworth was making non-fiction films, which would be films of current events or films of trains passing through tunnels and things like that. And around 1901, he started making fiction films. And at that point, when he started needing actors to actually play parts, he simply drafted in the people who were working for him around the studio. There were no professional film actors at that time. Now, this sequence may seem incomprehensible to those of you who don't know the story of Alice already. Basically, Alice is in the hallway of many doors, and the door is too small, so she has to shrink herself to get through it. She drinks the drink me drink to do that, and then she can't reach the key to open the door, so then she has to eat the eat me cake, and then she grows, and then she can't get back through the door again, and so on. The reason why this doesn't seem very clear is that the film is assuming that you already know the story. And so instead of having to tell you the story, the filmmakers are simply illustrating it for you. One of the common longer film subjects around this time would be biblical subjects. And of course, audiences would be well aware of the biblical story, and so you wouldn't need to construct a narrative the way you would for a story that audiences would not be familiar with. For example, an audience would know that the Garden of Gethsemane would follow the Last Supper in the life of Jesus. This truncated scene, which has a small Alice in a beautiful garden trying to get a big dog to play with her, the dog is played by the family pet, Blair, who would become the first great British film star in his alter ego of Rover. 2 years later, he appeared in Hepworth's Rescued by Rover, which was a phenomenally successful film, as a dog that saves a child from kidnap. And a couple of years after that, he appeared in The Dog Outwits the Kidnappers, again, in which he follows a kidnapper and steals his car and then drives the baby back home. The guy sitting on the floor with the frog mask on his head, I suppose you would call that, is in fact Cecil Hepworth, the director. You can see all these, the stage settings you've got here. There was no prop store at Hepworth's at this time, so basically they would use painted flats, and anything like you're seeing there, tables, chairs, whatever that were bought in would just be borrowed from local landladies, houses down the street, and the costumes tended to be bought from a second-hand costume store that was just at the end of the road. I should say a little bit about the kind of damage you're looking at here as well. All these white blobs and missing frames and missing parts of the image are a result of damage to the original nitrate print, which was given to the BFI's National Film and Television Archive in 1963, so 60 years after it first went into circulation. Basically, nitrate begins to deteriorate the second that it's made. It's a chemically unstable format. And gradually the base begins to shrink, it grows brittle, and the emulsion starts to peel away from the base, and the emulsion is where the image is held. So once that starts to happen, the images just gets lost altogether. The only way to restore these images, basically, is to find another copy of the film, which you can use to cut in the missing bits. Unfortunately, this is the only copy of the film that we've yet come across. There's a Cheshire Cat, done by a simple optical effect of filming Alice, and then winding the film back through the camera and then filming the Cheshire Cat as an insert, which was a common way of showing two actions occurring at the same time, or was also used for trick effects around about 1903. This is the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. The Mad Hatter there is being played by Norman Whitten, who was one of Hepworth's collaborators for many years. Hepworth filmed all his films at his studio in Walton-on-Thames, which was not a studio as you would be familiar with today. It was actually an 8-room house, which was just made over for the purposes of film production. The dining room was turned into a printing facility, and the upstairs bedrooms would be used for drying rooms where you'd have film festooned from rods hanging from the ceiling, just drying in the breeze. And in the back garden, Hepworth built a small wooden platform, which was the stage, and this is where this particular scene was being filmed. He didn't build an indoor stage until 1905, which was when he finally started to use electric lighting to light his scenes, but Hepworth never actually cared for electric lighting at all, and tended to film most of his sequences outdoors, in the streets of Walton, or indeed in local places of note, such as this next sequence. This was filmed in Mount Felix, which is a country house in Walton-on-Thames. It's no longer there. It burned down in the mid-60s. Just before this sequence was filmed, up until about 1900, the house was owned by John Cook, who was the son of Thomas Cook, the famous travel agents. And during the First World War, the Mount Felix became a military hospital for New Zealand war veterans. All these cards you're seeing here were all made by Hepworth himself. They were all the parts were played by local children. Hepworth began making films in 1899 and continued making films until 1924. Of all of the people who started making films in Britain, he was the one who survived in business the longest. And during this period, he was one of the most prestigious filmmakers in Britain. His work was applauded far and wide. Eventually, his work became a little bit outdated, a little bit slow. He favoured this kind of pastoral scenery, very slow stories, didn't use fast cutting, and in the end, as Hollywood began to take over the British market, his films seemed a little bit outdated. But he did achieve considerable success. Two of his actresses, Alma Taylor and Chrissy White, were voted towards the end of the war among the top British stars, along with Charlie Chaplin. Amongst the other films that Cecil Hepworth made were Rescued by Rover, which was made 2 years after this, which was the most successful British film of the early period, up until at least 1910, 1911. It was so popular that the negative wore out, and the film had to be remade twice more to continue making prints. And amongst all these little children running here is a guy called Geoffrey Faithfull, who went on, when he grew up, to become Hepworth's cameraman, and then went on in later years to work as a director of photography for Michael Powell, and also to film Two-Way Stretch with Peter Sellers and the original version of The Village of the Damned. So Hepworth is a figure that you may not know, but back in the 20s, he was a very, very important British filmmaker, and it's good that you've been able to see one of his films.